A relentless hush had settled over the valley. The air itself seemed thinner, drained of warmth and color, leaving only faint traces of gray against a bloodless sky. The little village in the hollow appeared deserted at first glance, houses crouched low on the outskirts, their windows boarded, doors rotting on sagging hinges. The only movement came from a slight breeze that brushed gnarled trees lining the single dirt road. No sunlight ever broke the perpetual gloaming. The horizon shimmered occasionally as if morning might come, only for hope to be devoured by a thick, oppressive darkness that refused to relinquish its grip. Travelers' tales warned of this place, calling it the village of ceaseless twilight, but those stories never fully conveyed the dread that settled like a stone in one's chest upon entering. I arrived on the back of a weary mare just as the last hint of warmth faded from the sky. My journey had been long and riddled with misfortune, broken wagon wheels, sudden storms that seemed to roll in from nowhere, and a sense of being watched ever since I had crossed the old boundary marker miles earlier. As I guided my horse forward, my breath rasped uncomfortably in the stagnant air. I had come in search of answers. Rumors spoke of an ancient curse that had befallen the villagers generations ago, binding them to a realm where day never dawned. When I reached the entrance to the village, the gravel road darkened beneath my horse's hooves, as though I were crossing from one plane into another. Shadows stretched and warped under the perpetual twilight, giving the impression of twisted fingers or contorted shapes creeping along the ground. I found the first house that still appeared occupied, its chipped door faintly ajar. The silent gloom of the interior beckoned. Clearing my throat, I pushed the door open a little wider. Inside, a solitary lamp flickered. A man, hollow-cheeked and hunched, startled at my intrusion. He stood behind a rough-hewn table, one hand gripping the edge almost desperately. His eyes were haunted, ringed with deep circles that gave him a perpetual look of sleeplessness. "You're not from here," he whispered, as though speech itself was an affront to the hush blanketing this cursed place. I nodded, uncertain of what to say, but his eyes told me he already knew why I'd come. "They always come seeking knowledge," he rasped, "and they all wish they'd left sooner." He gestured for me to close the door, then sank into a rickety chair lit by the flickering lamp. "My name is Emery," he offered. He hesitated before continuing, reluctant to share a secret that might be best left unspoken. At last he exhaled, "Be wary of the streets at night. You must stay indoors when the mist emerges, and do not, under any circumstance, seek the church bell." He would not elaborate further. His voice quavered when I pressed him, and he retreated into a frightened silence. Finally, he offered to let me stay in a dusty spare room upstairs, but only for a night, he insisted. No longer. Leave while you can. Though the night outside never yielded to morning, the passage of hours brought with it a shifting of atmosphere. Past midnight, a strange vapor began to roll in from the forest's edge, a glowing fog whose edges glistened with uncanny light. I couldn't sleep, for an unearthly glow seeped through the warped window frame, casting everything in silver blue hues. Emery's warnings echoed in my mind. Still, curiosity stirred dangerously within me. That's why I inched open the old glass, rattling softly. The mist was thicker than I had expected, swirling in slow, reeling patterns around the houses. Then I saw them. Shadows drifting through the haze, half-silhouetted shapes that ambled aimlessly. I squinted, uncertain if my eyes deceived me. Figures emerged from between the houses, their forms unbelievably gaunt. Their eyes were milky, their skin drawn tight over bony frames. Even though they glided rather than walked, I recognized what they were: the dead. Their presence sent shivers through my entire body. I had heard the stories, but bearing witness was something else entirely. The hush seemed to intensify, as though the entire world held its breath for these wraiths. They carried neither purpose nor awareness, drifting across the damp ground, leaving no footprints behind. Then one of them turned its head, and for a moment, I could swear its eyes flicked toward me. A piercing sensation radiated through my skull, and my hands began to tremble. I slammed the window shut. Beneath me, the old floorboard creaked as I stumbled back. That was enough for one night. I doused the lamp, slid into the narrow bed, and lay staring at the swirling gloom that seeped around the shuttered window. So began my first encounter with the village's impossible secret. The dead walked, unbound by the final rest that had once claimed them. In the dim morning, which was no brighter than the midnight that had preceded it, I crept downstairs. Emery waited, hunched over an untouched plate of stale hard bread. He gestured silently for me to join him. His gaze flicked to the curtained window, likely measuring the perpetual darkness beyond. "You saw them, didn't you?" He had the resigned tone of someone who knew there was no comfort to offer. "They come every night, year after year. They're our ancestors, or so we're led to believe, though no one can confirm who they were in life. That's how this curse works. It brings back every person who's passed here, some from so long ago that the memory of them is lost." I quietly asked, "Has no one tried to break the curse?" A weary smile tugged at his lips, as though he wanted to laugh, but found the notion absurd. "Perhaps we tried once, long ago, but the records of that attempt are gone. Burned or lost to rot, no one knows. The only clue is in the old church tower, but it's sealed now, and no one dares venture inside. Night in this place was eternal, but Emery spoke of the actual midnight as a deeper threshold, a time when even those who live behind locked doors are not safe." From behind his ragged curtain, he pointed to a towering spire that rose above the cluster of houses, a crooked silhouette looming near the heart of the village. I could just discern the glint of broken stained glass. "That is where it all began," he murmured. "Our ancestors offended something beyond mortal ken. Each time the bell tolls, another generation is condemned." To break the silence, I asked whether the villagers still conducted any daily routines. Emery shrugged. "We sleep when we can, though time has become meaningless. Work is scarce. Most people here are too terrified to stray far from their houses. It's a half-life at best." His words lingered as I made my way out into the lifeless streets. The darkness was constant, though my eyes were beginning to adjust. A faint luminescence clung to the horizon, offering just enough for silhouettes and shapes to float in an endless gloom. Yet each step felt like it was guided by unseen watchers, as though ghosts or other malevolent forces encircled me. I passed house after house. Some had collapsed beams, consumed by damp and decay. Others had dim lanterns burning inside, behind shuttered windows, a stubborn refusal to yield to despair. In the center of the village stood a statue, defiant in the gloom. It depicted a robed figure holding a sun-shaped scepter. The stone was chipped, eroded by countless years without daylight. At the statue's base, I noticed an inscription with words I could barely make out. "Repent, vessel of shadows." A chill slithered along my spine, and I found myself backing away. Above me rose the church tower. The front doors of the church were swollen with damp, flaking as though they might crumble under the slightest pressure. I tested the handle. It was locked. Something prevented me from turning away, though. I listened carefully and thought I heard, through the thick wood, the faint echo of a tolling bell somewhere deep within that labyrinthine interior. With every imagined clang, my heart thundered. Suddenly, an older woman appeared at the church's side gate, hobbling on a cane. Her face was a network of wrinkles, her eyes shimmering with an odd light. She scowled when she saw me reaching for the door. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, her voice slicing through the hush like a blade. "That place is not for you. It's sealed for a reason." The threat in her shaking tone told me it might be best to heed her warning, but as she turned away, I wondered what secrets lay inside, What knowledge might end the curse, if only someone dared to uncover it? Emery was nowhere to be found when I returned to his home. A note on the splintered table read, "I had to venture to the orchard. If you value your soul, stay inside after dusk." Beneath its scrawled words lay a small rusted key. There was no explanation of where it belonged. The rest of the house had little to offer. More stale bread, a small cask of water, a battered trunk containing moth-eaten clothes. The hours crawled by, marked only by my own restless pacing. Outside, the village slumbered in darkness. As the day gave way to an even deeper gloom, how one distinguishes day from night in this place remains a mystery to me. I double-checked the bolts and prepared Emery's dim lantern. But my mind kept circling back to the faint tolling I had imagined in the church. Could it have been real? Or had the spectral hush twisted my senses? And what purpose did Emery's key serve? The idea of venturing back into the street drew a fresh wave of dread, especially after what I'd witnessed. Yet, curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to unravel the mystery. The entire village reeked of unspoken truths, all swirling around that looming spire. I reasoned, that knowledge might prove my only armor in a place like this. Hours later, with the echoes of the next midnight drawing closer, I gathered my courage. Lantern flickering in hand, I slipped outside. The sky was a dull, moonless expanse. Clouds formed swirling patterns overhead, and the hush felt heavier than before. Houses were shuttered and locked, their occupants presumably huddling inside. My footfalls on the graveled road sounded unnaturally loud. The statue in the center appeared more sinister at this late hour. Its eyes seemed to follow me as though longing to speak. The old church's silhouette drew me in, as if by a gravitational pull. The hammered door looked just as formidable as before. I tried the handle, still locked. My hand slipped into my pocket, retrieving Emery's key. Hope surged through me, though it seemed unlikely that this small, rusted key would fit. But to my surprise, the lock turned onto a yawning blackness within. The rank odor of mold and decay assaulted me the moment I crossed the threshold. Broken pews littered the nave, their wood warped nearly into the shape of creeping vines. Torn pages of hymnals fluttered across the stone floor, stirred by an unseen draft. My lantern's light revealed pale slivers of discolored frescoes on the walls, depicting what might once have been scenes of joy and blessing. But the paint had cracked, leaving only hollow-eyed figures staring back at me. Toward the far end of the nave, the remnants of an altar sat perched on a raised dais. Behind it, a corridor led deeper into the structure. A battered staircase spiraled upward, the entrance to the bell tower. Each step was precarious, half-rotted through, but I climbed carefully, gripping the walls. My heart pounded at the thought of discovering what secrets lurked above. I reached the upper landing. A rotting door stood ajar, leading into a circular chamber. The smell of damp was overpowering. The bell tower's interior was wide and mostly empty, except for the husk of a massive bronze bell, silent and covered in greenish patina. But, more ominous than the bell, was the presence of a weathered altar in the corner, draped with what looked like centuries-old black cloth. It bore strange markings, a series of swirling patterns around a glaring crimson eye, all etched into the stone in some archaic script. My pulse quickened. Something about that altar felt alive. The air buzzed with an energy that made my skin tingle. I approached, noticing that the cloth lay bunched to one side. Beneath it glimmered old parchment, half a dozen sheets scrawled with the same swirling symbols that marked the altar. They were indecipherable at first glance, but one line of text was written in the common tongue. "He who wakes the bell invokes the watchers of the threshold." I recalled Emery's words about the bell's toll condemning the village. Perhaps it had once been rung as a gesture of defiance or a misguided plea for salvation. Now it loomed overhead, a monstrous relic of an irreversible mistake. I lifted a corner of the cloth to reveal more text. There I found a curious mention of an orchard, describing how the roots of the orchard lie entwined with the bones of the first transgressor. An orchard was precisely where Emery had gone earlier. My mind spun with half-formed theories. Could these references be instructions for undoing the curse? Or was I walking into something far darker? I slid the parchment into my coat. Just then a faint sound drifted up from below. The telltale shuffle of movement. My blood went cold. Peering over the railing, I saw something drifting through the darkness of the church nave. A figure, face unreadable, but its posture was unnatural, its arms hanging at odd angles. One of the dead? Had it followed me inside? My breath caught in my throat as it paused at the base of the staircase. I barely dared to blink. Then, as though hearing an inaudible summons, it moved onward. Drifting down a side corridor, I exhaled in relief. Not wanting to linger, I made my careful descent and slipped out into the street with the parchment pressed tight against my chest. The hush outside was absolute. The night sky offered not a single star, only swirling darkness overhead. I made haste toward Emery's home, hoping I could reach it before the deeper midnight arrived, summoning the dead into the streets in droves. Yet an unshakable sense of foreboding told me that whatever lay in the orchard might be the key to lifting the curse or sealing my fate. Sunrise had been absent for more years than any villager could recall, and it showed in their hollow stares and ragged clothes. Emery did not return that day. With the perilous hours slipping away, I took the battered lantern again and set out to find the orchard. Locating it proved simpler than expected, thanks to the weathered signs a previous generation had left behind. The orchard lay west of the village, reached by a narrow, winding trail through twisted trees. I ventured beyond the last row of houses, following the trail as it snaked past broken gates and sagging fences. The orchard appeared as a silhouette of black, skeletal branches against a backdrop of endless twilight. I caught a flicker of movement ahead. Another lantern. The faint glow drew me deeper. There, in the orchard's heart, I found Emery. He stood among the rows of gnarled trees, scanning the ground beneath their naked branches. At his feet, long, winding roots protruded from the earth, like the exposed bones of a great beast's rib cage. "You came," he said, glancing up with an urgency I hadn't seen before. "I hoped you wouldn't." I told him about my findings in the church tower, about the parchments and the references to the orchard. He nodded gravely. This orchard's origins precede the village itself. The legend goes that a wayward priest once tried to bind the sun's power here, to feed the land even when the skies grew dark. But something answered his prayers, something that twisted the land and the dead alike. He gestured at a large toppled headstone by the orchard's edge. Beneath that lies the grave of Father Tavarius, the first and greatest transgressor. Some believe that to break this cursed twilight, his remains must be torn from the orchard's roots and consecrated anew. Others say it will release a far grimmer fate. I showed him the parchment, and his eyes flickered with recognition. I've seen patterns like these before, on old documents lost to damp. If these instructions are complete, we might be able to exorcise whatever force anchors the dead to our realm, or we might doom ourselves further. He gave me a long, solemn look. "Are you willing to try?" Without further hesitation, we began. Emery gathered kindling and battered silver implements from a hidden cache in a hollow tree. The orchard's ground was strangely soft, but each spot we tried to dig was resisted by thick roots. We made our way slowly toward the headstone, clearing away blackened leaves and twisted branches. As we worked, my lantern revealed glimpses under the soil, fragments of bone. It was as though corpses were woven into the earth, forming a tapestry beneath the orchard. Finally, the stones around the headstone were cleared, revealing a tangled mass of roots that cradled something in their grasp. A fractured skull peered up through the gnarled web, mouth agape in silent agony. Emery's voice shook as he pressed a silver blade into the massive roots, prying them apart. The orchard groaned, actually groaned, like a living thing in pain. That was when the dead arrived. Not just one or two, but dozens, drifting out from between the orchard's trees. Their ragged forms glowed faintly in the lantern light, each pair of white eyes fixed upon us. I trembled so hard that I nearly dropped the parchment. Emery pressed on, though fear shone in his face. Roots gave way beneath his prodding, and the skull slipped free into the open air. A blast of stench washed over us. The smell of ancient decay exhumed. "Now!" Emery shouted, and we recited the words from the parchment. A swirling wind whipped through the orchard, carrying the faint toll of a bell. My heart lurched. The swirling text mentioned the watchers of the threshold. Did we just summon them? We chanted, culminating in an invocation for the purging of shadows, for the banishment of the eternal night. The orchard's trees shuddered. The undead throng advanced, bone-thin arms outstretched. Their movements became frantic, as though trying to stop us, or perhaps to rejoin their entombed remains. Emery thrust the shining blade into the skull, hissing the final words. A great flash of light erupted from the orchard floor. I stumbled backward, momentarily blinded. I snapped my eyes shut and felt scorching heat on my face. The hush that had defined this place erupted into a roar like wind through the heavens. When I opened my eyes, the orchard was illuminated by a sickly luminescence, unlike any true sun I had ever known. The swirling darkness overhead churned, forming a vortex. The dead moaned in unison, a sound that rattled my teeth. One by one their forms began to dissolve, breaking apart like dust on a gust. I watched in a mix of horror and awe as they faded into the swirling light above, dragged into that vortex. Some clutched desperately at the earth, but their substance turned wispy, scattering into the night. Emery still knelt, the broken skull in his trembling hands. Its sockets glowed with a malicious amber light. "We have to finish this," he gasped. The last instruction on the parchment called for the remains to be cast into a consecrated fire, but we had no such fire, and just as Emery said, the church had been long defiled. Then I thought of the statue in the center of town, bearing the inscription for a sun-shaped scepter. "The statue," I began. Emery's eyes widened, understanding lighting them. Without pause, we gathered our meager items, the skull clamped in Emery's hands, and ran back along the orchard path. The hush had been shattered now, replaced by howling winds swirling around the vortex overhead. The gloom seemed to deepen with every step we took, as if the very substance of the twilight was unraveling. Houses rattled on their frames. The swirling fog twisted in the air, lit by that sickly luminescence. We reached the central statue, hearts pounding. The robed figure still clutched its sun scepter, chipped though it was. A small, hollowed base lay beneath the statue's platform, blackened with soot, perhaps once used for ceremonial fires. Emery raised the battered blade and struck the statue's hollow base, clearing away centuries of debris. A gush of foul air escaped, but a recess opened into a shallow pit, thick with ash and half-rotted tinder. "Light it," Emery urged, thrusting the silver blade at me. My hands shook as I rummaged for the sparkstones in my pouch. Sparks danced onto the damp tinder, sputtering. The swirling wind around us roared, threatening to extinguish any flame before it could catch. In desperation, I tore a cloth from my coat and soaked it in a small vial of lamp oil. Another strike from the sparkstone, and the cloth ignited in an eye-searing burst of brightness. I dropped it into the pit. Fire blossomed, though weakly, fighting for life in the swirling gloom. Emery held the skull aloft, as if in offering. "By these words, and by the binding of shadows, we release thee," he recited. With trembling arms, he cast the skull into the fire. The bone cracked, sending sparks that burst like tiny stars. I shielded my face, expecting an explosion or a wave of malevolence. Instead, a torrent of wind swept out in every direction. The swirling vortex overhead contorted violently and then began to collapse in on itself, like a whirlpool draining away. The moans of the dead receded into a distant echo, growing fainter until they vanished altogether. The great hush returned. But it was different this time. The orchard's moaning ceased. The wind died. Everything felt uncomfortably still, as though the air held its breath. Then, gradually, a subtle change. The horizon began to lighten, as if silhouetted by a faint glow. Was it truly dawn? Could we dare to believe that the eternal twilight might be lifting? People emerged from their houses. Children, pallid and frightened, clung to their mothers. Men stood in doorways, shading their eyes. A distant bird call suddenly echoed across the silent valley, the first sign of morning the village had heard in countless years. Emery and I watched in wonder as the sky began to bloom with color, a gentle pink that seeped through the darkness, pushing it back as surely as a lantern chases away shadows. The ominous swirling cloud dispersed, drifting away into a brightening sky. Warmth creeped over my skin, exhilarating and unfamiliar after the clammy gloom. The villagers gasped, many falling to their knees in awe. Tears traced lines through the soot and dust on their faces as sunlight, real sunlight, caressed the rooftops. As the light spread, it burned away the strange mist that had shrouded the streets night after night. The silent throngs of ancestors were nowhere to be seen. Their passing had left behind only footprints in the soft earth, and a memory of pale eyes that would haunt dreams to come. Emery stood by the statue, shoulders trembling with relief. We had done it. Brought back the day, at least for now. Cautious hope spread through the village like a timid dawn. People whispered that the curse might be broken. Children blinked in genuine daylight, marveling at the emerging blue of the sky. Emery looked at me, and though exhaustion carved dark rings under his eyes, his expression was radiant. We both knew the cost had been high. The orchard and the remains of Father Tavarius still bristled with lingering darkness. But the cycle of perpetual twilight, the nightly parade of the dead, they seemed to have ended. That evening, and this time, it was truly evening, sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and gold. We crowded in the village square, gazing skyward in hushed reverence as twilight fell once more. But now it was the normal, comforting twilight known by the outside world. The stars twinkled. The moon rose in gentle splendor, illuminating a world no longer attacked by endless darkness. A hesitant cheer broke out among the villagers. Laughter, halting but genuine, reverberated through the crisp night air. Emery's house became a refuge for conversation and respite. We shared bread and the last of his water, the taste made sweeter by the knowledge that tomorrow we would wake to sunlight. We spoke in halting, hopeful tones about repairing the homes, replanting the orchard, and forging a new beginning. Yet a quiet sadness lingered in Emery's eyes, the memory of the walking dead, the centuries of shattered days. None of that could be undone. But at least the strangling weight of the curse had been lifted. Before I departed the next morning, I stood near the statue, with Emery once more. Warm rays of genuine dawn broke across the horizon. The statue of the robed figure clutching the sun scepter glowed, no longer threatening, but almost triumphant. Emery turned to me and smiled, a deep gratitude shining through his weariness. "Words will never suffice," he said quietly. "You risked your life to help us. You have our eternal thanks." I shook his hand, feeling a bond forged through our shared ordeal. The bustle of the village came to life behind us, people breathing freely, stirring with hope and talk of futures they had never dared to imagine. I mounted my mare, who seemed equally glad for the warmth. As she ambled down the road, I bowed my head in silent farewell to the village that had until so recently known only an unbroken midnight. I do not know what further perils might await that valley. The ghosts of memory and regret may always linger in the shadows. But I do know that day now rises where night once reigned unchallenged, and the echoes of the church bell have finally gone silent. In that change lies a testament to resilience. Even the darkest twilight can be shattered by a single spark of resolve, and a cursed town can learn to dream of sunrise once more.